Welcome to today's podcast, Book Nerds. Today we're joined by New York Times bestselling author Glenn Kaplan. He's the author of Evil Ink and Poison Pill, and now he returns with an international thriller, Angel of Ambition. This story captures attention from the first page with a complex heroine for whom you can't help but cheer, even though some of her actions may be unconventional. Readers who love the stories behind people like fake heiress Anna Delvey and characters like Amy Dunn in Gone Girl will love watching Angela's clever work get her and everyone around her everything they deserve. And without further ado, book nerds, let's get into the interview. All right, book nerds, welcome to today's podcast. I'm joined by Glenn Kaplan. He is author of Angel of Ambition, Poison Pill, and Evil Ink. Today he's going to be talking to us about his newest novel, Angel of Ambition. Glenn, it's nice to meet you.
Hey, great to meet you. Great to be here.
Hey, and for any of our readers that aren't familiar with your work, can you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. I'm the author of three thrillers, all standalone. One, Evil Ink, which was a New York Times bestseller. That was followed by Poison Pill. And my latest one is called Angel of Ambition. And it's my best one so far. I'm really excited to launch it with you guys.
Awesome. I'm super excited to talk to you a little bit about it today. So from my understanding, the main character's name is Angela. She's a super kind of hard and gritty kind of female character that's clawed her way to the very top. Can you tell us a little bit about her and her background?
Sure. Well, I'm a book nerd too, which is why it's so much fun to be on this. And Angela I was inspired by other female kind of revenge thrillers. For instance, Gone Girl or Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And Angela Hansen is kind of like them in some ways and unlike them in others. But like Amy Dunn in Gone Girl, she goes like psychotic with her desire for revenge. And Elizabeth Salander in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, she's like biblical eye for an eye. She gets back at the terrible man who raped her and tried to control her. Angela Hansen, she doesn't go crazy. She doesn't get violent. She doesn't do stuff like that. But what she does do is she takes it out in the world of business. And she started at the bottom of society. She grew up in the projects on 10th Avenue in New York, which is a really tough place to grow up. She had a single mom. Her father, who she really never knew, killed himself in a car crash when she was 7 years old. And she grew up thinking that it was her fault. And she didn't have much education, but what she did have was her mother always told her, you're going to make it. You're going to get way ahead of us. You're going to get to the top somehow. I don't know how, but you will. And she had tremendous intelligence. And she has, pardon me, she had another thing that was a real advantage. And she has an actor's gift for internalizing other people's accents and mannerisms. And so when she grew up in New York, and the interesting thing about New York is that the upper classes and everyone is all slammed together in the same place. And so everybody sees everything else. And so she was able to observe all the people at the top. And she, through her jobs, like as a manicurist and in a salon and working for the rich, she was able to pick up their mannerisms and learn them. And she eventually began to pass herself off as a really smart uptown girl. And she made it into the advertising business, which has a lot of upward mobility. And she was very cunning, a little hard-hearted. She knew, one of the things that she knew was that if she was going to make it, one thing she was not going to be able to afford was to give herself over to love. And she sort of resigned herself to that. She had a boss, a handsome, kind of, Don Draper advertising guy, very full of himself, a real hot stuff kind of guy. And she worked as his assistant. And at first she got him into an affair, thinking that she would learn more than just being, having him as a mentor. And then she made the mistake of falling in love with him. And then she made the further mistake of believing him when he said he was going to leave his wife and kid for her, and they were going to have a life together. And then, of course, like all these married guys do, he just dumped her. And it broke her heart and left her disillusioned, but it made her all the more determined to get ahead and to show this guy. So when the book opens, it's now 5 years later, and she has really rocketed up in the advertising business. She's become like a major player because she's tough and she's aggressive and she's a little hard-hearted, although inside she's constantly wrestling with her insecurities. Do I belong here? Will they find me out? You know, am I good enough? Am I really good enough? But she's such a good actress that she convinces the people in the corporation, and she's just like a superstar. Turns out they're going to have these big firings, and at the top of the list of the guys she's going to have to fire is the guy who broke her heart.
Oh.
And so suddenly she's got like, oh my God, this is revenge. This is revenge. And so as the story opens up, it's got that kind of revenge thriller, but it's set in the business world. And she has a lot of plans, a lot of machinations, a lot of things that she's plotting and planning. And she's got really big hopes and plans. And she's almost in the world of the super rich, but she's not quite sure how she's going to get there. And that's how the story opens up. And I don't want to spoil it, but you know, so it's kind of like it's kind of if there was a novel way back in the 19th century called Vanity Fair with a character named Becky Sharp, who rose to the top of London society. So if you imagine Becky Sharp, who was really smart and really cunning and a little bit amoral, combined with like the world of the HBO series Succession, that's what Angel of Ambition is. It's got a revenge thriller feeling, and it's kind of a power fantasy for women in business and women who want to get it all. I mean, the tagline on the cover really says it all. It says, Angel of Ambition, just try to stop her.
That sounds incredible, Glenn. I can't wait to read this book. I'm sure after getting that whole synopsis and hearing about Angela Hansen, I'm sure most of our other readers can't wait to get their hands on your book as well.
Well, I hope so. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be fast. You don't have to go to the beach, but it's a good beach read. And it'll exercise your brain. It'll take you to places where you haven't been before. It'll take you to some really glamorous places. We've got lots of glamorous settings around the world. Yachts, private jets, designer clothes. It's a lot of fun.
It sounds exciting. So, Glenn, I'm curious, kind of delving into the psyche of Angela Hansen, if you were to ever meet this character, this woman, and she was an actual person, is there anything that you'd want to discuss with her, or anything that you'd say to a character like Angela?
That's a really good question. I would ask her. Well, it would depend. If we were in a formal conference room in business, first of all, I'd probably be afraid of her, just because she's really, really good in the cold world of business, and she's learned how to put on the facade of a power player. But she's had help. So, for instance, she's made friends with this really rich heiress who looks at her and says, well, this is nice the way you dress, but you've got this terrible, ordinary, no-name purse. So she drags her into Hermes, and she forces her to spend $10,000 on a special Hermes 2021 bag, which is like a very exclusive bag. And she says, this bag is going to be your talisman. This is going to be your lucky charm. This is going to be the bag that you use to show people that you've got the power. And what she does is she uses it as a prop. So when she walks into a conference room, she sits down, she puts it down. That's her symbol of power. When she's done talking to you, she picks it up. That's a sign that the meeting is over. She's learned how to do that. But of course, all the time inside, she's asking herself, can I really pull this off? Can I really pull this off? So I would, if we were in the conference room, I would keep it very formal. If we were, say, having drinks somewhere and it was very friendly, I would really ask her, how did she get as far as she's gotten? What were her biggest power moves? When did they happen? How did she pull them off? Did she think she could really do them at the time that she did them? And maybe if we've had a couple of glasses of wine, she might admit, well, you know, there were some times where I didn't have any idea whether I'd be able to pull this off. But I sort of screwed up my courage, and I listened to the lessons that this guy, Jack, who dumped her, had taught me about life in the corporation and in business. And I just used his lessons. And sure enough, they produced the results that I wanted. So that would be what I would ask her.
Very nice. And she's such an interesting, dynamic female character, and her driving point is basically going through all this hardship and coming out of it successful. And like you said,
and what she really wants is she really wants to feel safe, because she has that feeling that if she makes one little mistake, one misstep, she's going to go be sent back to where she came from. And she doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want that to happen. But she knows that that could be. She doesn't have a feeling of security behind her. She's got no trust fund or any of those things that the rich kids have. I mean, she remembers growing up on there's a wonderful, these juxtapositions in New York, some of which are real that I used. Right across from the housing projects, there's this crazy expensive prep school, okay? Really exclusive, really expensive. And what Angela remembers is a little, like 11-year-old girl just standing on the corner there. And she'd look across at the prep school. And some of the kids would be driven to the prep school and chauffeured like Range Rovers. And she remembered, she'd see there was a little kid just like her in the back seat. And she'd wave to the kid. They'd just look right through her like she didn't exist. And she thought, wow. But then when the book opens, she's this big executive in London, and she's being driven around in a Range Rover. And she talks to this English guy who works for her, who's very devoted, who she has a really close relationship, almost like her little brother. And she says, you know, I remember these kids who ignored me when they were being driven around in a Range Rover. And here I am now, and I'm only like 31 years old, and I'm riding around in a chauffeured Range Rover, just like them.
okay, so my next question for you, with Angela, with the character, you writing as a male author, having to write from a female's point of view, what's it like doing the research for that? And do you have to do a lot of research, if anything? Because I know that you've probably drawn a lot of inspiration from your settings around you in New York.
Sure, that's a really good question. Well, I think on a number of levels, both personal and professional, it was actually a pretty natural thing for me. I remember I was raised by my mom and aunts, by a whole tribe of women who were all really strong, really independent, really intelligent, really savvy people. So I grew up surrounded by women who had a sense of their own empowerment and their own intelligence. So for me, that's the way women are. And I didn't have to make any leaps for that. And then actually I went for a while to an all-women's college. And because I'd come from an all-male college and I needed the relief, I had the opportunity. But it was like I got to this world of women and I became very comfortable in it. I had much more fun, much more interesting conversations, and I had to work so much harder at the academics in an all-women's environment than I did at the male college. And so for me, portraying women who are smart and independent and really powerful in their own way and really able to feel their own power is something that comes naturally to me. And furthermore, my career in the advertising agency business, the advertising agency business is just filled with women and has been for years and years and years. And so there are women of power and women of great intelligence and huge ability that's recognized and rewarded all up and down the advertising business. In fact, as I think about it, over my years in the advertising business, I had more women bosses than I did men bosses. And except for one who really was kind of a monster, and maybe there's a little of Angela in her, but my women bosses were actually more insightful, more powerful, and more helpful in developing me and the other people who work for them as professionals. So writing about a woman came very naturally to me, and I didn't feel I had to stretch to do it. So, and let the women readers decide. I will say this much: a number of the main character, the two main characters in Poison Pill are both women. There's Emma, who's the CEO of a big pharmaceutical company, and then there's a Russian girl who really grew up English, and the two of them are the main characters. And my women readers have commented to me from Poison Pill back in the day. They said, you know, when I read the character of Emma, I couldn't believe that it was written by a man because it felt so natural. So maybe I'm just lucky that way, but I think I'm lucky because of the women who raised me and the women I've been around. Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's extremely insightful.
Yeah.
That was a great answer.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious because I know you've had all these years of experience in these different fields, other than just writing. I mean, what's it like when you wake up in the morning? Like, give us a little glimpse into your writing process and maybe like a day in the life of Glenn Kaplan.
Sure. Well, when I was working full-time in advertising and marketing, I would get up at 4:30 in the morning, just naturally, and I would work before going into the office. And it was actually very productive and fun and highly stimulating. And the nice thing about it, especially because I was new to fiction at that point, is at that hour of the morning, I just need a cup of coffee. That's all I need. But it's a magical time. It's usually dark. Nobody has called you. Nobody has yelled at you. Nothing is broken. Nothing has to be fixed. You don't have to run on any emergency errands. And the real world hasn't intruded yet. And so I found it very easy to just slide into the world of my characters and to let them talk and let them do their thing. And then round about 6 o'clock, my family would begin to get up, the world would start, the real world would come in, the sun would rise, and I'd go off into the real world. And like everybody else. But I had that time to really let my characters breathe, and for me not to have intruding thoughts and all of the day-to-day stuff that we all have to live with and all have to deal with. And so that was how I got into it. Now I'm not working in marketing anymore. And so I can designate times of the day because I'm in more in control of my day. And the great thing, the fabulous thing, and actually post-COVID, is that during COVID, we all went to work in our pajamas. But even after this, I'm still going to be able to go to work in my pajamas, you know? So it's great. But I can pick the times that I work. And that's a wonderful luxury. And it's one of the joys of being lucky enough to be a writer. It's great.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds great. So when you're writing, Glenn, do you find the writing process to be draining or energizing? I'm just curious.
It's both.
Both.
It's draining because I think every writer, and we can't help it, and I go to writers groups and stuff, and every writer plagues him or herself with self-doubt constantly. And we all have a standard of what this ideal paragraph or this ideal chapter is going to be. And of course, we never attain it. You can always rewrite it, and it's never that. So, but once you get past that, having worked in advertising, we had to work on deadlines, and we had to work in a very small space, a small, copy space. So I learned to write fast and to be facile. And so what I'm able to do is I can get stuff down and just get it out. And then I can go back and rewrite. And I'm a pretty good writer the first time through, but I'm a much better rewriter. But that's true, I think, of most writers, and the hardest thing, the part that's draining, is getting that first piece out. The part that's exhilarating is working on it, perfecting it, taking the sandpaper to it, finishing it off, and then seeing it and feeling, yeah, that's pretty good. That's exhilarating. So it's a combination of the two. But the self-doubt is something that I know every writer, everywhere, all the time, it's something we all struggle with.
Oh, absolutely. I think every creative kind of would agree. I think I've gotten similar answers from some of our other interviewees as well, where there's processes like you mentioned where it's just kind of draining, but then once you get it out there, it's just like a freight train. You can't stop it. It just keeps going.
Yes, absolutely. And the most wonderful thing that happened early in writing fiction, and I didn't believe it would happen because I sort of didn't believe when writers talked about it, but it's really true. When the characters start to do things that you didn't plan for them to do. When you sit down to write a chapter and you're sort of going through it, and then suddenly the characters will do something, you go, oh, that wasn't in my outline. I didn't plan that. I didn't realize you were going to do that. And you kind of talk to your page and you go, where did that come from? And the character says, it's what I had to do. And you just sort of go and you, okay, well, I'm not writing, I'm transcribing on behalf of these characters. And when that happens, it's tremendously exciting because you know that the characters really have taken on a life of your own. I mean, obviously it's one's psyche and all that jazz, but the feeling of it, in the same way, I think that like deja vu is, they've got these technical explanations for what that feeling of deja vu is the way the synapses go and all that. But even so, it's like that feeling of deja vu that feels like something that's sort of outside yourself and that it's happening. And that's tremendously exciting. And it also keeps you interested because from day to day, you don't know what the characters are going to do. And you sort of can't wait for those surprises. If everything was completely worked out in the outline and it was just sort of filling in from an outline, and I know the writers who believe very strongly in outlines would slap me across the wrist for this. But if everything went exactly according to the outline, I think it would be pretty boring.
It's a little too predictable, right? It's kind of fun when the characters take a life of their own.
Yeah. I mean, we all love surprises. And when they come from characters that we love, even the characters that we hate, that we love, we love and we hate them. It's like there's a character in here who's an older man. He's the billionaire that everyone is trying to impress. And he doesn't care what he says because he doesn't care because he's a billionaire and he'll say whatever he feels like. And he will say embarrassing things. He will say stupid things. He will say outrageous things. He doesn't care. And when I was writing him, it was always a delight because I'd start the chapter and I go, okay, what's Cliff going to say this time? And sure enough, he would come out with stuff and I go, whoa, I didn't realize he was going to say that. And that's tremendously exciting when that happens.
It definitely sounds exciting. So
Yeah.
with the writing process, Glenn, when you're writing these stories and coming up with your ideas, do you usually kind of envision it like a certain world coming to light first, or is it the characters that you come up with, or what's that usually like for you?
That's a very good question. I'm a combination. I like to imagine the world that they're in. That helps me a lot. And that gives me some general things to be interested in. So I'll do research. So it's like this book, has a number of scenes in London, and in about the last third of it takes place in the Caribbean island of Antigua. And so a low stress, interesting way to sort of ease into it is to do research and to sort of get a feeling for the world that the people are going to inhabit, and to have a sense of the climate and the specifics and the culture and the places. And that becomes actually kind of like taking a vacation and going somewhere. And so I can start with that. And then the characters, as I develop them, they have a place where they're living, where it's happening, that they can react to. And that helps me place them. And then I can dig in, what's their backstory? What were they like as kids? What were their parents like? How do they behave now? What kind of things do they hate? What are they afraid of? What are they trying to get? What's standing in their way? All those things that you need to know. You need to know about your fellow human beings, not as well as, fictional characters that you're writing in a book.
Oh, absolutely. And to kind of build on that question, what do you think is the most important aspect or element of storytelling for you?
It's what I learned in advertising, and I've got blurbs from James Patterson. We were both in the advertising business together, and so we knew each other. And he's been very generous with me over the years. The first thing that you learn in writing advertising is, I think, what also applies in this is holding on to your reader's attention. So, in other words, I've got to figure out, how can I take you by the shirt collar nicely, engagingly, charmingly, and keep you interested. Because as soon as you kind of, I've lost you. And so you think of every page as, how can I hold you? How can I hold your attention? At the end of each chapter, how can I get you to want to read the next chapter? And I think that's an essential discipline, is to keep the feeling of that writer, of the reader rather, right before you. And, am I giving you enough to keep you going? Am I keeping you interested? Am I involving you emotionally? Am I doing all those things to keep you wanting to read more and more? And that's I think one of the critical disciplines. And that's in that sense, when you're sitting at 4:30 in the morning and you're writing, yes, it's solitary, but it's really you and an imagined reader. So there's two of you in a way. And I think if you lose sight of that other person and just kind of get lost in your own head, you can lose the reader. And I don't want to do that.
I think that's a really interesting way of seeing that. That's really cool, actually. So what's the most valuable advice that you've been given that you would want to pass on to other readers or even aspiring readers?
Aspiring writers?
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't give up. It's so hard to get noticed. It's so hard to get published. It's hard to get an agent. It's hard to get it's just hard. And everybody, and all the people who are on the top of the best, they have so many stories of rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection. Jim talks about his first novel was rejected, I think, by something like 48 publishers. Not good enough. This guy will never go anywhere. So that's very hard. It's hard on your ego. It's hard on your confidence. It's hard because you have to do it on your own. I mean, you can have friends and family who support you, but at a certain point you kind of go, well, they do that because they really like me, and they don't really know what these people in publishing know. But you have to just be able to power through that and persevere. It's hard.
I think that's a great piece of advice.
I can't show. It's really, really hard. But if you're really determined and you really feel that you've got something you want to share and people are really gonna enjoy it, then you just keep on, and you just have to screw up your courage day after day after day and not take the rejections personally. I mean, you don't know, you could be rejected by a publishing house or an agent or whatnot. And you may think, oh, they're saying I'm no good, or this book is no good. You don't know what the context is. So for instance, they may just have signed a writer who writes books that are in the same category as yours. And so they're not rejecting you. They're just saying, well, we just signed a writer who writes similar books like this, or we already have too many writers in this category. And there's no way for you to know that, but that's what's behind the rejection. I mean, it also may be they just didn't like it, but if they just didn't like it, during the law proceedings about the potential merger of Simon & Schuster with Random House, the judge asked all these questions of the very top executives. And he said, basically, do you know what's going to make a hit? Do you know what's going to sell? And they all, to a person, said, no, we don't know. We just guess. We don't know. We don't. And he said, what? You mean you guys run these giant companies and you don't really know? And they went, no, we don't. He was aghast. But so that's another reason not to take take the rejections too seriously. But that's my one bit of advice.
Oh, absolutely. And Glenn, just to kind of wrap up the interview here, can you tell our readers where we can find your work? Are you on social media? Where can we
Sure,
find you?
I am. You can find me on Instagram on Glenn Kaplan Author. And I've got a wonderful set of videos on YouTube. All you have to do is search Angel of Ambition. And we've got a whole fleet of wonderful videos that we shot with a wonderful actress who maybe looks like Angela. Well, she does for the videos. And those get a lot of traction. I'm on Facebook at Glenn Kaplan Author. And those are the best places to find me. And Angel of Ambition is available everywhere. It's easiest to buy it on Amazon. And let me put in a plug for the audiobook, because we did something very, very special for the audiobook. And people who have listened to it we've come back with terrific reviews. Because Angela and Jack are the two main voices, we decided with the audiobook we needed a female narrator to do all the female parts and a male narrator. And furthermore, with two great actors, Stephanie and John. And what they do is they don't just, do their narrator voices, but they also do specific character voices for all the different characters. So it's not just an audio book, it's an audio drama. And these talented people at Blackstone, you can find it on audio, on Audible, and Downpour, all the places. They've done such a fabulous job. I'm so pleased and very proud. And they took my book and my words and they made them even better. So please check out the audiobook because it's really good.
Absolutely. That sounds like an experience.
It
Oh,
is.
great.
It's really good.
Glenn, thank you so much for taking the time to do the interview with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be on BookNerds. Thank you so much.
What a great time. Glenn, you had some incredible answers to these questions today. So glad to have you here on the podcast and so grateful that you took the time for the interview with us today. Before we wrap everything up, is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners?
Hi, I'm Glenn Kaplan, and my new book is called Angel of Ambition. And you're listening to JeanBookNerd on the JeanBookNerd podcast.